Thank you, Cindy. Our first panel for the day is part 2 of the national stage, 21st Century Criminal Justice System and the Criminalization of Latinos. This discussion closed out day 1 of the summit and included so much important information. So let's continue the panel now with moderator Leonard Morales, attorney at law. Welcome back, Leonard.
Welcome back, everyone, for part 2 of our panel discussion, 21st Century Criminal Justice System and the Criminalization of Latinos. Again, I'm Leonard Morales. We want to welcome back U.S. Senator Cory Booker for his videotape remarks.
Hi, I'm Cory Booker. I ran for office for the United States Senate, telling people all over New Jersey that criminal justice reform would be one of my top policy priorities. It's because I've seen firsthand how our broken criminal justice system is affecting all of us. It treats people differently in this country along often socioeconomic and racial lines. It costs us billions of dollars wasting on the back end of people's lives as opposed to investing in the kind of things that empower people to thrive in life. We treat problems like addiction and mental health and trauma with prisons, police, and jail, and not healthcare, mental health care treatment. I know when I was growing up, I witnessed in a wealthy suburb in New Jersey relative to where I live now, I saw that there was a different justice system there than the one we have here. That we weren't a nation that was living up to those highest ideals of equality under the law, liberty, and justice for all. And so from the time I've been in Newark, New Jersey, I've been working with incredible allies to reform our system, to make sure that anyone in our system finds justice, that we become more about restorative justice than retribution. And whether it's reforming our marijuana laws or making sure that we are dealing with women in our system, because now here in America, the land of the free, 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are here in the United States, disproportionately low income, disproportionately minority. And so we know that according to the ACLU, that unfortunately with drug use, there's no difference between blacks and whites for using marijuana, for example, or selling marijuana, but blacks are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for possession. We've also seen that in the crack powder cocaine disparity. Every area of the criminal justice system, we are seeing, unfortunately, often the worst of who we are as a society, not the best. And so I'm proud to be leading on reforms, many of them. When it comes to marijuana, I'm now joined with 2 of the more powerful people in the Senate, the Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, and the head of the Finance Committee, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Ron Wyden, trying to move major marijuana legislation. It's not just about legalizing marijuana. It's about expunging records. It's about reinvesting in communities disproportionately targeted. I'm working with other senators to address that crack cocaine, powder cocaine disparities. I'm working with people about prison reform. I'm working with people to lower violence in our communities by investing in our communities, reducing the need for police and doing the things we know that actually reduce crime and elevate human flourishing. There's a lot of work to be done, and I'm grateful that you are allies, you are leaders, you are partners in this profound purpose of our country, that when we put our hand on our heart and we pledge allegiance to the ideals of liberty and justice for all, that they're not words set in rote routine, but they are a commitment, a pledge that we will reimagine our nation, that we will have more beloved communities, that we will have justice rolling down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you for your light, for your leadership, and for your love.
Welcome back, Patrice.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's roll back into the questions here. And I know that this panel has asked a lot of heavy questions. And what we're wondering is, in what positive directions do you think criminal justice reform is heading? And how can LULAC and its members ensure that our policymakers and our representatives continue to head in that direction?
I appreciate that question. There are so many things that need to happen, but there are great things happening along the way and a lot of positive things to report as well. I think, first of all, last year really represented a sea change in public opinion about how we punish people. And that's probably the biggest thing to be excited about, that people are really thinking differently about how we handle crime and punishment in this country. And people are really opening themselves up to big transformative changes instead of tinkering at the front or back end of the system, really rethinking the system as a whole. And some of the reforms that I'm most excited about at a local level here are bills that we've had introduced to expunge criminal records, particularly automatically expunging records of non-conviction, bills that limit police authority to chase vehicles through our streets, to shoot at moving cars, to interrogate children without a lawyer, to search people's homes for nonviolent drug offenses. Those are all efforts that are really getting a lot of momentum or have already had bills introduced here in DC. And I focus on the local level or highlight that because all of those things can be replicated in other states and tailored to the community needs there and to what we see in police departments, prosecutors' offices, and prisons there. We are also starting to see a lot of energy around changing corrections. Most notably, there's an Unlock the Box campaign that has now 18 different state partners committed to trying to end solitary confinement and restrictive housing practices. So those are the biggest efforts that I'm most excited about, but we're also seeing prosecutors do things differently as well at the executive level. But the legislative reforms get me really amped up.
We have a long way to go in order to reach our goal of ensuring that all who encounter the justice system have fair and equitable treatment. However, there is a lot of incredible work being done to advance these goals each and every day. As you know, the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division recently opened investigations into the Louisville Metro Police Department, the Minneapolis Police Department, and more recently, the Phoenix Police Department. Our pattern or practice investigations like these that we've just opened have been successful at identifying not only whether systemic misconduct is occurring, but also getting to the root causes so that those root causes can ultimately be fixed. We've seen real results from this work across the country, and I'll give you just a few examples. In the city of East Haven, Connecticut, we successfully implemented an agreement that specifically addressed policing practices impacting the Latino community. The independent monitor assessing compliance determined that the case resulted in a reorientation of law enforcement practices in East Haven, which in turn helped to restore trust in the police between East Haven's Latino community and the police in particular. In Cleveland, Ohio, we work to address use of force issues. In New Orleans, our investigation showed significant problems with virtually every aspect of their practices when it comes to use of force. During the course of our consent decree, we've seen dramatic changes there, not only in the use of force, but across policing practices. For example, in 2012 and 2013, the years before the decree was entered, there were 18 critical firearm discharges. In 2017 and 2018, those numbers dropped dramatically to 3. Consent decrees have also helped to eliminate programs and practices that have repeatedly resulted in harm or legal violations. In Los Angeles, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department stopped conducting raids of homes of people who are living in Section 8 housing. In Ferguson, Missouri, the decree there required the city to revise the procedures of the municipal court to eliminate incentives underlying policing for profit. This has had a significant impact on enforcement. In the 3 years before our investigation, Ferguson averaged roughly 21,000 charges per year. And in the last 3 years, Ferguson has averaged roughly 5,000 cases per year, all while violent crime has gone down. The U.S. Department of Justice is also working to prevent the criminalization of poverty and working to ensure that our courts operate fairly and equitably. On May 18th, Attorney General Garland announced that the Justice Department will reinvigorate its role in leading access to justice policy initiatives across government through the reestablishment of the Office for Access to Justice. This office will work to alleviate entrenched disparities in our criminal justice system, work to address barriers to access in our immigration and civil legal systems, and advance health, economic, and environmental justice. These efforts will culminate with the issuance of a report that outlines the direction and focus of the Access to Justice Office with an eye toward the continuing needs of communities today. That is expected in September, so please be on the lookout for that.
So how can LULAC members advocate for resources that serve families impacted by the criminal justice system? You know, whether it's through things like you mentioned, like through local prosecutors or maybe sentencing guidelines, which I'm not a big fan of, but or legislation that criminalizes nonviolent crimes?
Well, I think you've identified some really important topics that should be at the forefront of any criminal justice reform agenda. But more fundamentally, I think we need to see an effort to insist on legislators listening to the voices of people who are justice impacted. It might sound kind of simple, but what we really need to do is insist at every level, at every meeting, that the right people be in the room. And it's a smaller lift to do that in some ways, but it's something that's not happening at all. As the levers of power are being pulled, the wrong people are at the helm, and they're not being informed by folks who actually know what will make their communities safer, what will make their systems more just. And so I think that's a small thing that everyone can do, right? It is just that insistence on who are you listening to? Listen to folks who have been victims of crime, listen to folks who have been incarcerated, listen to folks who have been really thoughtful about this at a neighborhood level for a long time, and just getting the right people at the table is a huge contribution as well.
The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department partners with the U.S. Attorney's offices around the country and the FBI to investigate and criminally prosecute hate crimes, willful misconduct by law enforcement, and human trafficking. Through our pattern or practice work, we have also sought to ensure that hate crimes are accurately reported and appropriately responded to by law enforcement agencies. In Suffolk County, New York, for instance, our agreement there includes specific requirements about the documentation and mapping of hate incidents. Our team continues to work to ensure that those requirements are fully implemented. Our work to ensure that no one lives in fear of victimization by one's government, whether that be by police officers, jailers, or other government actors, is also a top priority. In May, a former police officer with the St. Paul Police Department was sentenced to 6 years in prison after a jury found him guilty of using excessive force against an unarmed civilian. And just last month, a grand jury indicted a Mississippi prison deputy warden for beating an inmate. Most recently, a former police officer in Meridian, Mississippi, pleaded guilty to using excessive force against a man during a vehicle stop and arrest. These are just a few examples of the ways in which the Civil Rights Division is showing its full commitment to investigating and prosecuting law enforcement officials who violate one's constitutional rights. We're also working to ensure that every person in this country benefits from public safety systems that are lawful, responsive, transparent, and non-discriminatory.
So Let me ask you one more heavy question, Patrice. How does the topic of hate crimes fit into this criminal justice reform puzzle? And how can LULAC ensure that those impacted by hate crimes are given justice?
Well, I think we should be cautious of trying to solve problems through criminalization. Any statute that authorizes punishment or enhanced punishment can backfire. We've seen that with our hate crime statute here in Washington, D.C., where it's been used to actually prosecute the people that it was intended to protect. And what I think we really need to do is ask questions about how a given legislative proposal is going to help people, right, as a whole. We can't just keep giving politicians credit for authorizing new punishment. We have to ask them, what investments are you going to make? How are you going to restore and repair the harm that was done? We can't just celebrate the authorization of more jail time. And so, although it's really important to do something, right, about the surge in hate crime that we're seeing and the bias motivated discrimination in every aspect of public life, we can't just rely on criminal statutes and hate crime enhancements to do that work for us. It hasn't deterred behaviors in other spaces, and it's unlikely to be really effective here, in my opinion.
The next part of that question is, how is the criminal justice system less effective in communities that have limited access to legal services, people of color, economically disadvantaged people, and the sort of intergenerational presence in the prison system? I mean, we see many generations oftentimes of individuals who have fathers and grandfathers that were incarcerated. I know I see that on a daily basis. It's almost sort of the family business, unfortunately, in some families. And how does that make our criminal justice system less effective in those types of communities?
I'm really glad that you mentioned the intergenerational impact. We have known for decades that incarcerating people in mass has its own criminogenic effect, right? That it actually precipitates more crime, right? When you get to a certain level of incarceration, we know that those neighborhoods, those cities, those communities that are being caged are less well off and more in danger than they would be if we had left them alone in the first place. And so we now have, as you mentioned, several generations of people who have had people removed in mass, and it's causing more crime in those communities, and everything that stems from having a high crime rate flows right back into that city, right back into that neighborhood. So we really are affected by the criminal justice system in ways that other communities are not, because the criminal justice system itself is doing violence and doing harm affirmatively in those places in ways that it isn't when we have a smaller, more narrowly tailored, focused legal system instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'd offer you, Patrice, an example specifically. I had a client just the other day come to talk to me about his child support arrearage. This was a guy that had been incarcerated for about 10 years, got out of prison, didn't know his son, has had really no relationship with him since mom is very reluctant to let him interact with his father for obvious reasons, to have being an ex-con, as it were, as they're called, and he walks out of prison with a bill for $90,000. And how are you supposed to overcome that? Not to suggest that he shouldn't have some responsibility to his child, but that's a big bill to walk out of prison with.
The costs of incarceration are incredibly high, and it's much harder to bear in communities that have that high of an economic need to begin with, right? Even if we look at our traffic enforcement as a simpler example, right? A ticket in Washington, D.C. for turning right on red is $100. But if you can't pay it within 30 days, it's $200. And that's a lot of money to a lot of people who live in certain parts of the city, so much so that it ends up meaning that they no longer have a driver's license, which means they're subject to arrest if they drive, which means we have people going to courts and going to jail and spending tax money that is a lot higher than that original ticket was. And it completely ruins a person's ability to be able to move forward, all in the name of public safety. And so it's just sort of ironic that we've decided to advance public safety by doing things that make us less safe.
Right. Well, Patrice, thank you so much for your participation in the panel. All right, thank you, Patrice. Do you have any closing comments? Anything else that you'd like to offer to the members here?
Well, thank you again for including me on this panel. It's been wonderful to participate with LULAC today. One of the efforts that I'm most proud of working on is a revision to the entire DC criminal code, rewriting the offenses, rewriting the penalties in a comprehensive way. It's something that I'd love to see other states do, and that I'd love to see other states do successfully. And I think the reason that our project has such a good chance of moving forward and actually becoming enacted and being made law is that we heard from stakeholders throughout that process. Every time we drafted a set of recommendations, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office, our Public Defender Service, legal scholars weighed in and gave us feedback, and we incorporated what we learned along the way. So I would encourage other organizations to think about that kind of huge, meaningful overhaul, to think about doing it in collaboration with folks that you know will be at the table when the legislature is actually considering making those changes. And it's something that I'm excited to help other states do if they're interested in doing that. So please feel free to connect with me. We're on all social media channels as DC Justice Lab, and I'm pretty easy to find online as well.
Sounds like a great resource, Patrice. And again, congratulations on all that work. It's amazing stuff. I don't think people really appreciate how much work goes into all of that.
Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing too.
All righty. Thank you again, Patrice. And wonderful. We'd like to thank the panel. These are some of the preeminent leaders in criminal justice reform in our country. And we want to thank them for their time, their energy, and lending us their expertise here over the past 2 days in our panel discussion. We invite you to reach out to them and find out ways for you that you can get involved in criminal justice reform. And we wish you much luck in that area. That's luck for all of us. The upcoming session that we're having is on voter suppression, another so important topic, and we hope you will join us for that panel discussion. And thank you very much. Again, my name is Leonard Morales, and we thank you very much for joining us.